Welcome to the Root of All Eagles YouTube channel. And today, our quarterback, Jalen Hurts, signs a massive $255 million contract extension, keeping him an Eagle through the 2028 season. We're going to talk about Jalen Hurts' contract extension, and we're also going to be releasing our mock draft 3.0. So stay tuned. The running back scenario have been a major topic of conversation for the Philadelphia Eagles fans this offseason, with Miles Sanders coming off of a career year to sign a deal with the Carolina Panthers. According to Eagles News, former Eagles running back Miles Sanders signs with the Panthers. I think it was a 3-year, $25 million contract. Sanders came under fire after 21-22 season because he failed to find the end zone at all despite having 754 rush yards and 158 receiving yards on the year. Miles had never been a high volume scorer in Philly, and of course, Jalen Hurts was running teams ragged from the quarterback position, but the fans and likely the coaching staff wanted to see a little more from Miles Sanders. So in 2022, he silenced all critics, benefiting from a high powered offensive system and making the most of his opportunities with 1,269 rushing yards and 11 rushing touchdowns, with new career highs in rushing attempts, yards, and touchdowns. Of course, with that came the interest from the free agent market, and I didn't expect the Eagles to pay him a multi year deal or to match it if he got a great offer elsewhere. That's exactly what happened with Carolina coming in and offering him. So it was actually a 4-year deal, $25 million. Of course, that's awesome for Miles. I'm glad he got paid. I'm also glad it wasn't by the Eagles. As the new contract for Jalen Hurts and the decision to spend wisely in retaining key veterans showed, the Eagles have their house in order and their priorities in the right places. They knew the mega deal for Hurts was coming and clearly wanted to get that wrapped up, and keeping Jason Kelsey, Brandon Graham, Fletch, and other key veterans on the roster and in the locker room was undoubtedly one of the main priorities for the Eagles, who are clearly in win now mode. So, Sanders' departure leaves a void in the backfield, and while I'm all for refusing to make long term commitments to running backs who have had just one 1,000 yard season, I'm against going into the season looking to challenge for a Super Bowl with Rashad Penny or Kenneth Gainwell. Rashad Penny basically signed for the league minimum, and I know we've talked about this before, but you just don't pay a guy a minimum deal off an ankle surgery and expect him to be the starter. If you get 800 plus yards and 150 carries out of him, then you're maxing the value. But it's not to be expected. With that in mind, we need help in the backfield, and something is going to happen either via the draft or with the rumors swirling around available running backs throughout the league. Let's start with the draft. The majority of experts have Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs as the top two running backs available in this year's class. Bijan Robinson out of Texas is the consensus number one and the most complete back available in the draft, while Gibbs has a ton of upside and potential to grow into a star in the league. Let's start with Bijan, who we know by now has exceptional vision and a high football IQ to go along with his physical traits. He's 5'11", 220 pounds, and as agile as they come at the position. Bijan always has his eyes downfield and is one step ahead of defenders a lot of the time. He dominates in one-on-one situations with the ability to fake defensive backs out of their shoes before making sharp cuts and change of directions to gain additional yardage. He's got a wide range of experience at the college level, running around 65% of his snaps in zone reads and the other 35% in gap. So the Eagles know he can do both at the next level, and that versatility is what is great for him coming out of the draft. When you look at his 2022 stats, he had 64 carries right up the middle, in the middle right and left gaps, while taking just shy of 50 carries outside the tackles and 108 carries to the outside, which means the run goes outside the tight end or furthest blocker from the center. A lot of Bijan's production came on those outside runs. He averaged 7.1 yards per carry on those stretch runs and closer to 5.2 when running up the middle. Both are good numbers. There's a lot more traffic inside, and you don't run as far before you run into contact. And when you do, it's the big dudes, defensive linemen and linebackers, whereas the outside contact can often be a failed arm tackle attempt from a DB, easier to run through. Bijan can do it all. Over 800 receiving yards and 8 receiving touchdowns in his 3 years at Texas. Good numbers for a player who is as good of a runner as he is. The only drawback to his game is the speed. He just doesn't have track star speed, and he can be run down on long runs. I've seen comparisons to Saquon Barkley's level of dominance at Penn State, but Barkley ran away from everybody. He had that in him. Bijan gets caught from time to time, and while his speed is certainly not a reason to pass on him, it does open the door to look at other players in the class who do have that speed, if that's what the Eagles are looking for. Jahmyr Gibbs is that. Gibbs ran a 4.36 at the combine, and some believe he can still run faster than that. And he's lightning quick on the football field. He passes the eye test in that regard, and he's extremely productive on stretch plays and taking the ball outside. Gibbs has 929 yards in 2022 on 150 carries, adding 7 rushing touchdowns. He is, however, lighter, and he's got a very different body type than Bijan Robinson's. Gibbs is 5'9", 199 pounds, and he's a stretch runner primarily. His production between the tackles is good, but those numbers heavily benefited from big gaps for him to burst through. He won't see as much space in the NFL, and that's something that needs to be evaluated. Can he be an every down back in the league? When you look at Bijan Robinson's yards after contact, you know he can fight for extra yardage between the tackles and manage a workload of 20 plus carries a game. Gibbs' yards after contact when running up the middle averaged 2.68 yards compared to Bijan's 3.47. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it's noticeable on tape. Gibbs is lighter and therefore easier to bring down. That said, he's quicker and more difficult to get a hold of. Really comes down to preference. Gibbs can do some great things and occupy a defense with his speed threat and explosive run ability. Bijan Robinson can take a lot of pressure off of Jalen Hurts with 18 to 22 carries a game and some great consistent production on the ground. So, what would the Eagles rather have, and what's the likely cost of the two? Bijan could be off the board in the top half of the first round. There is a chance we see that happen. But like we've spoken about in previous episodes, there is no team in the top half of the draft with the draft capital the Eagles have, plus the quality of roster that we have. A team like the Washington Commanders isn't going to take a running back with their first round pick because they have other key needs. The same is true for everyone else at the end of the draft, and the Eagles are unique because the number 10 pick is obviously not their original pick. It's the Saints pick. So, do we take what has turned out to be a bonus pick in the top 10 of the draft coming off of a Super Bowl appearance and spend it on a running back? I would argue that we don't do that. I'd rather see us trade down or use the pick for a gem in another position, likely on defense, and then go back in for a running back with our own pick late in the first round or on day 2. It all depends on where Bijan falls. If we just use the 10 pick on another player, maybe a defensive lineman or a stud on defense, and then Bijan is still available when we're back on the board at pick 30, then I would take him there without even thinking about it. If we're looking at Gibbs, the conversation is more whether he's going to be available at 62 or not. I feel like taking a player like Gibbs at 30 is a bit of a reach and almost a secondary option should Robinson have been snapped up before we got the chance to pick him. I don't want to panic into that situation and end up reaching for a running back in what is a really deep class. We could always see how we move around. I wouldn't be surprised to see draft day trades considering the capital we have available. So, what do we think? Is it worth using one of our day one picks on a running back? Are there two other positions we value more and can find day one starters with those picks for? Because both of those day one picks absolutely need to be starters in year one if they are challenging for a Super Bowl this year. They have to hit the ground running. Let's look at some other picks the Eagles should be looking at with our four picks in the first three rounds. If we're looking at defensive line support and starting to add depth in preparation for a future after BG and Fletch, then how about Adetomiwa Abedawore out of Northwestern? Versatile defensive lineman who can set up multiple alignments across the defensive line. He's got the speed and agility to fire through gaps up the middle and has a really diverse set of tape at Northwestern showing off his skill set. He lacks a little flexibility, which could likely mean limited reps coming off the edge, but his ceiling, if coached up correctly, could make him a really strong weapon for the Eagles long term. He's a 6'2", 280 pounds, and he ran a 4.49 at the combine with 27 reps on the bench. He's an athlete, and the team that drafts him is going to be looking at a young man who could grow into something special at the next level. When you watch his tape, his burst off the ball jumps out as well as his ability to win and dominate in one-on-one rush situations against offensive linemen. He's a penetrator who would find his way into the backfield, and we know we're looking for a guy like that to step into Javon Hargrave's role and play alongside the sturdier interior linemen in Fletcher Cox and Jordan Davis. He grades as a middle of the pack talent on day two and could be available in the third round, making him a prospect worth a look for Philly. If we're looking for more of an edge prospect, then Nolan Smith could be the guy, maybe in the second round. I'd like to see the Eagles add some talent coming off the edge. This might be BG's last year in Philly, and giving our future starter at the position a year to play alongside him and learn from him is huge. Not only learning technique and how to play the game at the pro level, but learning what it means to play for the Eagles, right? Who better to teach these values than Brandon Graham? He's done it all. Smith is an interesting prospect. He's got a great size and speed combination. He plays hard, physical, always around the football, and he's an edge prospect who ran a 4.39 in the combine. He can chase down just about anybody, and he's never out of the play. Great versatility to play against the run and the pass. He is kind of a question mark, though, because his exact fit in the league isn't certain. He's deemed as an underside as an outside edge. He's 6'2", but he's only 235 pounds and could be a hybrid, but different teams who are going to see him in different ways. But there's going to be different teams that are going to see him in different ways. He's got a good ceiling. He's a natural ball player, but he's underdeveloped as a pass rusher. Needs to work on his hands and his skill set in defeating blockers to get to the quarterback. But then he could play beside Hassan Riddick in a similar role there. Maybe. What else have we got on the radar? I wonder if we look at the offensive line and start to build out some depth there. I don't think it'll be a priority on day one because we have five starters, but we do lack some depth and we need to at least consider what the future looks like. Dawand Jones is a skilled offensive tackle, likely available on day two. The second round pick could go there as the successor to Lane Johnson, perhaps. He's a big dude who has that wow factor when you look at his frame as a potential starter at tackle in the league. He's 6'8", so there's that. And he weighed in around 375 pounds. So if he developed the right way, you're looking at a sensational second day pick. I also like Connor Galvin, and he'd be available a lot later out of Baylor. Also a big tackle, 6'7", but a little lighter at under 300 pounds. could serve as depth at the guard position, particularly on running plays as he transitions into the pros. He's a day 3 guy. Very intelligent football player, but doesn't have that wow factor when it comes to his athleticism and potential ceiling in the league. But certainly a role player. If we feel that we're good at tackle for a couple of years, he's a good option for some depth, and you could call upon him if need be. And then finally, what about the receivers? Do we need another one? Quez Watkins is our third guy, but how often do we really see him impact a game? I can't help but feel like having another guy out there who can make a difference would legitimately make our offense unstoppable. And we did just yesterday sign the Falcons wide receiver. I'm not even going to try to attempt his name right now. So there's going to be some competition at the wide receiver. But I expect Quez Watkins to be right now, as the roster stands, to go into next season as the number 3 wide receiver. But if we're looking at other wide receivers, I don't know if a day 1 pick is worth it. It would be a little strange for us to go for a receiver on day 1. But man, there's a lot to like about Quinton Johnston. He slipped down the draft boards a little because he doesn't quite play up to his size. He's a big body receiver with a long stride, and he can really burn defenders both over the top and with the football in his hands. He's got some things to develop, like attacking the football at the catch point and tightening up his route running, but with a frame like his, the sky's the limit for his game. For the Eagles, though, I prefer the approach of a late day 2 pick if we're going to try to improve on our wide receiver 3. Guys like Marvin Mimms, Parker Washington, Tyler Scott. Scott in particular jumps off the page if we're talking about a late day 2 selection. He's explosive, he knows how to create separation, and I can just picture him making big things happen over the middle of the field with teams being so concerned with Devontae and AJ. If we're talking about a blend of speed and ball skills, Scott is a great choice. Makes things easier after the catch. Elite speed, smooth route runner, great value on day 2. I could see us going over to the defense with those day 2 picks, though. Of course, it depends on what happens on day 1, but looking at corners and safeties is also a viable option for the Eagles. We need to look at replacing some of that production from CJ Garner Johnson, and I still don't know who our single high deep safety is going to be this season after letting Epps walk. There's some good mid-round value at corner in this year's draft. Look at Justin Ford out of Montana. That young man really knows how to play the game. He's an instinctual zone coverage corner, reads the quarterback well, always knows where his receiver is, and times his jumps well to give himself the best shot at breaking up the play. Seen a lot of good things from Ford in the red zone, some well-timed pass breakups, 2 picks in the 22 season. He's a taller corner, 6'2", and doesn't need to play right away. But I want to see us looking at guys with the most upside if we've grabbed 2 starters on day 1. That's how we stay good for a lot of years. Okay, well that about wraps it up. But I do want to talk about some of the other rumors going around the league right now in terms of highly talented players on the move. Dalvin Cook is looking at a potential release if the Vikings are unable to find a trade partner for him. And when you dive into it, it makes quite a lot of sense. This is coming from the Vikings insider. The Minnesota Vikings could release Dalvin Cook in the coming weeks if the team is unable to find a trade partner. And that's per Jay Fowler, ESPN. I'm told all options are on the table here and that he could be released closer to the draft if things don't work out. Dalvin Cook is looking at a potential release, like I said, if the Vikings are unable to find a draft partner, a trade partner for him. And when you dive into what makes quite a lot of sense, they paid Alex Madison good money to stay there this offseason, and they've committed to getting him more reps, which makes Cooks expendable. He's getting a little older, and he's had some trouble with his shoulders, which makes him a risk for any team picking him up, but we know what he's capable of when he's healthy and on the field. He'll be 28 when the season starts, four-time Pro Bowler, almost 6,000 career rushing yards, 47 rushing touchdowns in the league. And yes, he's faced some health issues, but he's also posted 4 1,000-yard rushing seasons in a row. When it comes to the Eagles potentially adding him, yes, I am 100% in favor of doing that. And if you do that, you still draft a running back and you feature Cooks as the starter with a round 3 draft pick and Rashad Penny taking rotational reps behind him. Give Cook a 1-year deal. See how your rookie develops, see how healthy Rashad Penny is, and reassess the group next offseason. But Cook would elevate our offense, and if he's cut, he shouldn't be too expensive. Philly can afford to take a risk on him because they should be drafting a running back. If you can do both, then adding Cook is a no-brainer. Then there's Buddah Baker, and that's about as good as it gets when it comes to looking for a solution at safety. Baker is more suited to the strong safety role and coming downhill to play against the run. He would be a replacement for CJ and a brilliant one at that. The problem here is that he wants out of Arizona because he wants a new deal. And whether Philly is willing to pay him that if they wouldn't give it to Garner Johnson. Although that whole scenario was weird, I think we offered him a deal and he turned it away and then signed for less in Detroit. I remember seeing a lot of things about him needing a new agent, and after the season, he had signed a 1-year deal worth $8 million with Detroit, which is a problem for him. Maybe we should have kept him, but it doesn't always work out that way. Buddah Baker is going to require draft capital, and according to sources, Buddah Baker is likely to be available for a second or a third round draft pick. So it's not much. And when you're looking at an all pro player like Buddah Baker, it's something that's well worth it. But he also wants a contract extension deal upon getting traded, which is exactly what we did for AJ Brown. And look at the difference it made. Veterans over rookies right now is my mindset. You can't draft a rookie safety and expect him to play as the single high in his first year when you're trying to win a Super Bowl. Look at what the Chiefs did. They went out and got the Honey Badger, added experience in the secondary, and won a Super Bowl. I'm all for that, and how we could repeat last year's antics by shifting the draft pick for a guy who's already proven he can play at this level. So yes, pick up Dalvin COOK and Buddah Baker, and we'll make confetti angels on the field when we win the Super Bowl. Go Birds. Thanks for watching this episode of the Root of All Eagles podcast on YouTube. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe down below. Also, go ahead and follow us on Spotify or wherever you stream your podcast at Root of All Eagles, and on Twitter at Root of All Eagles. And we'll see you in the next episode.